What's going on, guys? Chip here. Welcome back to another Pokemon video where today I'm joined by a very, very special guest, one of the big names in the Pokemon video game community, Aaron Cybertron Zheng. This is definitely a different type of video for me. I've wanted to do some Sword and Shield content, and so I was very happy whenever I reached out to Aaron that he was willing to do this. So, yeah. Aaron, how's it going, man? How are you doing?
Good, man. Thank you for having me here. Really excited.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone who's stumbling across this video who might not know who I am, my name is Chip. I play the Pokemon TCG as well as commentate for the Pokemon TCG. And I think with Sword and Shield coming out, there have been a lot of people becoming interested in Pokemon VGC that are involved in the TCG. So I wanted to make this video to kind of get some information out there about what qualifying for the World Championships in VGC looks like. And Aaron, as someone who has qualified many times for the World Championships and also someone who has played the TCG in the past, I thought would be a good person to bridge that gap. So Aaron, why don't you take a second, introduce yourself for anyone out there who may not know who you are.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. So I'm Aaron, obviously, as mentioned. I've been playing the video game and in the VGC circuit since its first year, way back in '08, which is kind of crazy to say. So back then, yeah, I was in the juniors division, and I've played in pretty much every year since then. Throughout the years, I've done relatively well. I've won 5 regionals, 2 nationals, and got 3rd at Worlds. My first year in Masters all the way back in 2013. And in the more recent years, I transitioned over as a commentator and a content creator for the scene. So I have a YouTube channel where I post guides and videos for the VGC scene. And really exciting time right now, obviously, especially because Sword and Shield just came out. There's so much hype around the game, and like competitive Pokemon is really just kind of blowing up. So that's really cool to see. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I've kind of been involved in the scene in multiple different ways, whether it be a competitor, a commentator, or content creator. And as you mentioned, I actually played TCG way back from '08 to like 2013, because back then you could actually play in both regionals for TCG and TCG. They weren't at the same time, so I actually like go to regionals and play in both. But then at some point, they like merged the two, and they're at the same time now. So after that point, I had to make a decision, and VG was kind of the obvious decision for me.
Well, cool, man. Once again, thanks so much for being willing to do this. I feel like there are a lot of people out there who are obviously, very familiar with the Pokemon games and kind of just, how they're played, singles, one-on-one battles with your team of 6 Pokemon against your friend or like against the NPCs in the game. But competitive Pokemon, as far as the World Championship circuit is concerned, actually looks a bit different for that. So if you were like explaining to someone who is obviously familiar with the Pokemon video game, the differences between just like casual play and VGC, how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, I think in general, everyone understands, even if you play Pokemon just casually, that there are battles in the game, right? And so fundamentally competitive play is just these battles, but at a very, very high level. VGC is unique because it's also double battles, whereas most of the games and battles that you play in the game are singles battles. So 2v2, which adds a lot more depth to the game, a lot more complexity to it. And at the end of the day, it's just kind of taking these battles that you normally have in game and just making them significantly more interesting, I think, and a lot more in-depth. So it's kind of an easy way to summarize it. When I describe it to people that don't know anything about Pokemon, I kind of say that it's like a combination of like chess, rock, paper, scissors, and poker. You have some elements of all of those games combined into one.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I feel like there's definitely a lot of people out there who've like maybe also competed in the TCG, but they're now getting involved and like interested in VGC. I've heard lots of even top level players talking about, oh yeah, at Dallas I'm playing VG instead of TCG, so it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of shapes up. But
yeah, definitely.
For anyone who may not know, obviously I think the end goal for most competitive players is going to be to get an invitation to the World Championships, which this year is taking place in August in London. First time it's taken place outside of the US, so I think a lot of people are really excited for that. And there's definitely like a qualification requirement in order to get there. They don't want just anyone to walk up and be able to play in the World Championships. It's supposed to have some level of prestige to it, so you do have to work to get there, and that is usually done, or it's exclusively done through championship points. So if you were explaining how championship points worked to someone, how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, sure. So for the VGC scene, similar to TCG, there's multiple levels of tournaments. So you have premier challenges, which are like small local events, mid-season showdowns, which are slightly larger but still local events, regional championships, internationals, and worlds. And regionals and internets obviously are pretty much the same as TCG.
Hmm.
And for each of the events, you get championship points based off how you perform. So it's normally like top 8, top 16, top 32, sometimes top 64 for the larger events. And depending on where you place, you get a certain number of points. The higher you place, the more points you get. And you accumulate points throughout the season. And if you pass the goal of 400, then you get an invitation to Worlds. And so there's tons of different ways that you can get to Worlds, depending on, which events that you go to. Some players prefer only going to higher tournaments because they don't like to go to local. So, only going to regionals and internationals, but they do well enough there where they can get an invite. Some other players like to kind of farm the locals and prefer to stick to their local scene, maybe go to like 1 or 2 regionals, but they're also able to get an invite from that. So there's definitely multiple paths you can take to go to the World Championships. And it's really dependent on kind of what your goals are, where you live, and how accessible regionals are, and how much time you're willing to spend over the weekends, for example, going to locals.
For sure, yeah, and we kind of have the same thing in the TCG, where I would say premier challenges for VGC would be comparable to league challenges for TCG, and then mid-season showdowns would be comparable to league cups, which we have in the TCG. So a little bit of comparison there for people who are familiar with those terms. So I know with like TCG we have depending on where you live, you can probably find a premier challenge, or sorry, a league challenge or a league cup within a few hours of you just about every single weekend. Would you say that's kind of similar for VGC? Are there tournaments relatively accessible, or do you find them to be a little bit more sporadic?
I would say more sporadic. Some areas I think have a lot. For example, like Ohio in previous years had like tons, and like one of the TOs moved to like the New York, New Jersey area. So now like New York and New Jersey has a bunch. Like California, there's a bunch of local, but yeah, I feel like there's some regions where there's like tons every weekend or every month, and then there are other regions where like it's very hard to find any scene. I do think with Sword and Shield though, there will be more TOs and more tournaments held in general. So hopefully, I think that will encourage more local scenes to kind of open up and thrive.
Yeah, I know in my area in North Carolina, one of our TOs has posted in one of our Facebook groups about, hosting a Premier Challenge. Like, he's never done a VGC event before, but obviously the interest is there. So I think that, you will start to see a lot more popping up after Sword and Shield become the legal games starting in January. So I think that's also kind of a weird thing for people. The game is out right now, but it's not like the legal game to be played. So, for example, this past weekend was the Daytona Regional Championships, and it was still Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. This coming weekend is going to be San Diego Regional Championships, and it'll also still be Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, but starting, I believe January 4th is the date. The Sword and Shield will be the games to go to, and that's when I think we'll see a lot of people, getting into this. So I was actually kind of looking at your YouTube channel and looking at some of the numbers from the past. I looked at whenever Sun and Moon first came out, the very first Road to Ranked you did got at this point, that was 3 years ago, it has 84,000 views, which is like a pretty good amount of views. But that's obviously the start of the new format, the new games. A lot of people interested in the game. But your first video for Sword and Shield has gotten 200,000 views already, and that was 3 years ago. This was just a couple weeks ago that you released that video. So I would say like the interest in VGC is just exponential compared to what it has been in the past. Why do you think that is, and what do you expect that means for the game moving forward?
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good question. So I think first of all, it's because it's a lot easier now to basically get into competitive play, especially with Sword and Shield. There were, with each generation, there were always kind of these barriers that made it difficult to get into the game because like it was hard to train up a team in game, for example. But with Sword and Shield, they kind of have eliminated pretty much all of those barriers. So you can make like a competitively viable team in game pretty much within a couple of days now through things like raids, which get you really strong Pokemon, through things like nature mints, which allow you to change your nature, bottle caps, which allow you to change your IVs. They've removed the cap on vitamins, so now you can instantly, EV train a Pokemon just by buying vitamins. And so things are a lot easier nowadays than they were, say, even in Sun and Moon. So I think that accessibility makes people more inclined to get into competitive play to begin with.
Sure.
And also, I think there are two other things. One, rental teams. These were in Sun and Moon as well, but I feel like they weren't covered as much. But basically now you can like jump on the online ladder and just try out any teams that people have publicly posted. So there have been some great resources, and there are over like 25 teams that top players have put out there already that you can try out. So it makes it a lot easier to basically just play games in game instead of having to build it yourself before actually getting it in game, which I think is also really good.
Sure.
And then finally, I think, content creation has just been really good in bridging the gap for people that might not know anything about it. Like Wolfie Glick is, one of the most famous players, if not the most famous player in our scene. And his YouTube channel's like popped off in the last couple of days. He gained like 20,000 subscribers in 3 days, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And he did a collaboration with a YouTuber called AlphaRad. He's pretty well known. He has like 1.8 million subs, which is, huge. And they kind of did this collaboration, and it brought a ton of people who are kind of like Nintendo fans or Smash fans, but might not know anything about competitive Pokemon or, just Pokemon as a whole in general. It introduced a lot of those people into the scene. I think one of the problems with VGC in the past is like a lot of people just don't know that it exists. And
right.
Some of the old formats are like stale to an extent too, right? Like with Sword and Shield, there are only a couple legendary Pokemon, and those are banned, and they'll probably be banned for VGC. Whereas like previous years, you had like the Tapus or all these big legendary Pokemon in formats like 2019 and 2016. So it feels like just all the combination of this with Pokemon being easier to get, more people kind of getting into it, more content being created around it. It allows more people to kind of get into it. And now more people are discovering like competitive Pokemon is the thing. And they're like, hey, it's actually pretty easy to get into. I want to try it out myself.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we're looking here on this page at the World Championship point requirements. So we talked about championship points, and I think you did briefly mention the requirements. And this is going to depend on the age division you fall in, as well as where you live in the world. So juniors are going to be, I believe, people, I think it's like 12 and under, something like that. Seniors would be between 12 and 15-ish. And this is all dependent on like the month you were born in and stuff as well. And then Masters would be anyone else older than that. And Masters is definitely the largest group in TCG, and I believe also in VGC as well, the largest, most competitive group.
Yep.
And as you can see with that, it is the higher points threshold to get to. So Masters, and I would say for the majority of this video, we're going to be referencing mostly VGC Masters, and probably mostly about US and Canada, since it's also the largest rating zone. But also players from Europe have to get to 300 points, Latin America 400, Oceania 300, and then South Africa 200. And all these resources are on the Pokemon website, and they'll be linked in the description of the video. All the things we're going to be referencing here. So we've covered World Championship qualification. We've covered what championship points kind of look like, and talked about some of the local tournaments, premier challenges, and mid-season showdowns. The next thing mentioned here is actually select online competitions, and this is something I think is really, really cool about VGC that we don't get in the TCG. Being able to actually earn championship points towards your Worlds invite while you're sitting on your couch at home, I think is a super cool thing. So do you want to talk about what the these kind of look like, what they are, and kind of the frequency of how they occur?
Yeah, definitely. I actually haven't played in one in quite a while. They were actually like in 2013, where I was like really grinding for an invite. They were pretty much mandatory because back then there were only like 3 regionals, 1 nationals, and 1 worlds.
Yeah.
And so you'd only get championship points obviously from regionals and nats and these online events. And I think there were 5 of them in that year. And that back then, like, it wasn't like any people who qualified over a certain bar got the invite. It was only, I think, like top 12 in America. So they were like super competitive because pretty much all the points mattered. I think nowadays, like, a lot of people don't even play in these events because they have enough like locals and regionals to go to where they don't really need the points. But like you mentioned, it is got a cool opportunity, especially for players that might not live close to tournaments, to be able to accumulate points online. So I forget exactly how many there were last year, but typically I want to say it's around like 4 or 5 throughout the season. Might be less now, but from each of these, you can win like points based on how you perform. And it's kind of like the online ladder where you get matched up basically against anyone randomly, but the higher you are up and the more points or wins you have, then you're going to be getting matched up most likely against people who are also higher up. I don't know if they're going to change it from Sword and Shield, like the matchmaking system for online competitions, but it normally spans, I think, like 3 days or so. So, over a weekend, and it's normally like 72 hours or something like that. And it's cool, because For example, if you're actually gunning for a Worlds invite, you play in a couple of these and do pretty well, you can actually get a fair amount of points. But for a lot of people, it's also like a cool way just to get practice and get like high level play in over a weekend, since there are going to be a lot of people playing in these events. So yeah, it's just kind of a cool, unique experience, I'd say, especially for players that might not live in areas that have a lot of events.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point there. There's something I actually wanted to talk about, and that is practice. So with the Pokemon TCG, I think a lot of times you see these groups of, players come together, they test different decks, figure out like the ideal, counts of the perfect 60 cards they want for their deck heading into a tournament or something like that. Do you see similar types of things in the VGC where you have playtesting groups, people who get together and figure out, what the perfect team looks like, what the perfect EV spreads are, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, definitely a thing in VGC. I think if you look like at players who win tournaments, a lot of the times they are part of a small group of friends who share ideas, spreads, just general, metagame impressions or whatnot. So very similar to TCG in the sense that there's always groups of people that are trying to find, the best play for an event, or find like something that can break the metagame, for example. So yeah, definitely very similar parallels there.
Sure. All right, and the next two levels before the World Championships as far as tournaments go would be regional championships and special events, which are kind of lumped into one category. Special events will be mostly in places where, regional championships aren't happening, so they're just kind of lumped together. And then international championships, which are kind of the premier events besides World Championships. There's 4 of these throughout the year across the world, and they're definitely a really cool experience. If you've never participated in one or watched one, it's definitely kind of a Worlds-like feeling without quite being the World Championships. So, so there's multiple regionals throughout the year. I don't have it pulled up here, but we'll have it linked in the description of where the regionals are through the rest of the year, and then 3 more remaining international championships. Do you want to just kind of speak to how the competition might differ at the regional and international championships compared to something like a Premier Challenge or a mid-season showdown?
Yeah, definitely at the local events, especially now with the newer influx of players. I think you'll see a lot of like beginners at regionals and mid-seasons, although that's going to be the case at regionals as well, but more so at these local events. And once you get to like internets, for example, at least in the last couple I just feel like the level of play has like improved even throughout the years. And so like even like round 1 now at regionals or internets, like the people you're going up against are really good. That being said, Sword and Shield is going to change the dynamic a little bit, because there's going to be such a big influx of players that are going to be at the local events and at the higher level events as well. But with local events, these are typically smaller, there are fewer rounds, there's less on the line, so it's not as intense. Once you make it to something like internets, then there's a lot more pressure on the line, a lot more points and money and prizes on the line. So overall, I'd say you're going to get a wide range of players, I think, at actually all the level of events with Sword and Shield, is at least in this first year for sure, because I think there are going to be so many people that are going to try to just get into it. And so the variance is definitely going to be pretty huge even at the larger events. But I think like at the higher level of a regionals or internets compared to like a local event, you're going to have a higher concentration of like really good players as opposed to maybe just a couple at a local event, for example.
Sure. And yeah, you mentioned something there about the prizes. I think this was one of the coolest things for me when I like first got into the Pokemon TCG. There was no prizes at all, but then in the 2017 season, I believe, was the first season they added like actual money as prizes into the game, which I think was really a big boost for both TCG and video game at the time. So there's definitely like real good amounts of money on the line at some of these bigger tournaments, and there are lots of people who make pretty solid money by continually performing well. Looking here at the prize table I just pulled up for video game regionals, as long as there's over 200 players, which I feel like we'll probably be hitting from here on out most of the rest of the year, is first place takes home $3,000, second place $2,000, top 4 $1,000, 5th through 8th $500, and then $250 for the top 16. So I guess something else to kind of talk about here at this point, I think regional championships is one of the best entry points to the competitive scene, outside of like if you're looking to get into it outside of just like your local area. Regional, I know like all the time I talk to people who've like had their first regionals experience the previous weekend or something like that. So I think it's a great place to get in. how would you explain to someone kind of what a typical day at a regional championship looks like? How does the tournament structure break down, and how do you determine, who becomes the winner at the end of the tournament?
Yeah, it's quite similar to TCG. So anyone coming from TCG will be familiar with the Swiss rounds, where you're getting matched up every round, and if you win, then you're getting matched up against people who have the same record as you.
Yep.
And if you lose, same thing. So the one difference is that for VG there isn't like a day 2. It's just you play a certain number of rounds of Swiss, and then you cut to top 8 or top 16. Maybe some top 32s now, with the new games being out and attendance being probably significantly larger, but. Yeah, it's relatively straightforward. You sign up in the beginning of the day. We play on, I think like Saturday. Normally, like you play 7 to 8 rounds. I think with Sword and Shield, it might go up to 9 because there's going to be a lot of people at these events. And then the top, whether it's 8, 16, or 32 players, depending on attendance, then move on to a single elimination bracket. And then that bracket plays down on Sunday until there's a winner that's decided. So pretty straightforward, nothing too crazy, and a little bit less complicated even than TCG because there isn't that day 2.
Sure. And also something for those TCG players that VGC does not have, that we are definitely very used to, is intentional draws, IDs, and ties.
Yeah.
There's always going to be a winner of a VGC match.
That's
So that's something definitely worth pointing out. With the larger tournaments you've experienced in the past, what kind of record is generally what you need in order to get to the top 8 of the tournament?
Yeah, I mean, like...
I know it depends and stuff between tournaments, but...
Yeah, for like 9-round tournaments, it's typically like 8-1. You're definitely going to be up there. And with those 9-round tournaments, I think it's normally a top 16. So there are like some 7-2s that make it as well.
Okay.
But yeah, you pretty much have to go 8-1 to guarantee your spot, I think, a spot in top cut. So it is pretty intensive, especially because, VGC is a game with a lot of variance as well. So... it's similar to TCG, where it's like top players bomb tournaments every now and then, that's for sure. But I think, one common misconception people have about the video game is that there's like, so much luck involved and blah, blah, blah. But like, there's a reason why some of the top players consistently win and do so well. So even though I think it is quite difficult to make it out, like the top players are able to do it quite consistently, which is a testament to their skill.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that tournament structure will be similar as well for the international championships. Worlds does look a little bit different between day 1 and day 2. Do you want to kind of explain how that kind of breaks down and how the World Championships might differ?
Yeah, well, first of all, for internets, there actually is like a day 2 structure. So
I actually didn't realize that. Sorry. Yeah.
It depends on the size. So I think like smaller internets have literally just gone like 7 or 8 rounds and then top cut. But then like larger ones like NAIC, I'm sure EUIC would be like that as well, where you have 9 rounds and then you normally have, I think, 5 rounds in day 2, similar to TCG. And then cut to top 8 as well. So pretty similar structure there. For Worlds, it's day 1, day 2, and then top cut. So for day 1, I think like normally players have had to win like 6 or 7 games out of the 9, or 6 out of 8 or 7 out of 9. So XM2 basically. To make it on, normally there's like 20 or 30 people that move on from that field, and then they are combined with all the players who already have day 2 invites from performing really well in their respective regions. That combines to a total pool of, it's been around like I think 80 players or so, and then all XM2 players make it. So if you go like 5-2 or better, then you move on to the top cut bracket, and that's normally like top 16 to top 24 or so, and that plays out until there's a winner.
Okay, cool. All right, so I think this has been a pretty good start right here, breaking down what it looks like to get to the World Championships. Obviously the different levels of tournaments, the local and then the larger ones being regionals and internationals. So if someone has watched this video, they know now, like, okay, I think I want to try to get my World's invite. I think it's definitely, the season has already started. It started back in August after the World Championships concluded, finishing up with Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. But I think that there is still definitely more than enough time for someone to get their 400 points that they would need in order to qualify. So don't let that scare you off. So after we've kind of gone through this and talked about how to get involved in the competitive circuit, what would you say to someone who's like, okay, I know this now, where do I go from here? What do I do as far as building a team? Like, where do I gather more information? What are some good resources there?
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually making a video on this that should come out in the next week or so. So hopefully that'll be able to guide people to all the right resources, but a couple off the top of my head. YouTube's obviously a good one. Wolf Glick's YouTube channel has been popping off, and he's the 2016 world champion. And definitely like one of the players you could consider the greatest of all time. So the fact that he also runs a YouTube channel while competing at such a high level is really impressive. I have my own YouTube channel where I post battles, and there will be a lot of guides as soon as the format rules get announced, and that should be coming out very soon. And there's a lot of great websites as well. Two of the big ones for VGC are Trainer Tower and Victory Road. Within those websites, there's a ton of different things. There's articles, there's tournament reports, there's tournament results. They also both have rental teams. So if players want to just try out a team and play online, see, kind of test the water, see how they fare, both of those sites have a list of rental teams that top players have kind of compiled together. Trainer Tower also has a damage calculator, which is really helpful for anyone, regardless of whether you're new or not, just to understand how much damage a Pokemon should be doing against opposing Pokemon. And these are calculations that you eventually want to memorize so that once you go into a tournament, you'll know exactly what's happening. There's also a subreddit for VGC that's really just got started. That's r/VGC. A bunch of really top community members are trying to make that grow and organize it so that it's kind of like a good hub for discussion and for the community as a whole. And then there's also Twitter. Obviously, following any top player will be helpful, but there's one Twitter specifically, VGC Stats. They actually have been holding like weekly tournaments on the RVGC subreddit, and they often post like top performing teams and statistics of what Pokemon are doing well. They kind of accumulate data from regionals, locals, internets, pretty much every tournament, and post it. And so once Sword and Shield comes tournaments start, they'll be posting stuff on there pretty regularly as well. And then there's a ton of great players outside of like YouTube to follow as well. On Twitch, Sejum Park, the 2014 world champion, he's been streaming consistently. His viewership's been really cool too. It's normally in Korean, but the gameplay is still like really, really high. He was like top 10 in the world on the ladder. So that's good. Tons of other great players that also have content on like Twitch and YouTube. But yeah, in general, I'd say like a lot of great resources out there nowadays compared to what it was back in like 2010, for example.
Sure. Yeah, and Sejun, also a name that a lot of TCG players will probably recognize as someone who's, been kind of that dual threat competing in TCG some years and VGC. I think he got, if I remember correctly, top 32 at the TCG World Championships in 2016, I think, something like that. So he's definitely had his fair share of success in both games.
Yeah.
Of course, like you said, being world champion in 2014. Okay, cool. So I think that covers just about everything I wanted to bring up specifically. Is there anything else out there before we kind of close up that you feel like would be a really good fit for this video, like to describe to someone about VGC who, is still new to it and trying to figure out what they want to do?
Yeah, overall, I would just encourage people to give it a try. I think it's easier than ever now to get into it, and I think with the new game and a new generation, everyone's starting on the same blank page again. So, a lot of players might feel intimidated thinking, oh, I have never played before. Some of these guys have played for like 5-10 years. How am I going to match up against them? But VGC is a really unique game where like you see new players come in and do really well quite frequently. And there's been many stories where someone's come in on their first year and, won a regional championship, made it all to worlds, top cut worlds. And it's definitely a game where there's a ton of depth, but if you are dedicated to getting good, you can definitely get pretty good in a short amount of time. Getting really good is obviously the challenge, but I think it's a really, really fun game, and it's one where people have really not explored it like fully. And now as more people get into it, as players get better, it's only going to be more exciting. But yeah, with all the resources out there nowadays, it's definitely doable to get into it. I would say don't feel too overwhelmed. There can be a lot of things, so kind of just tackle things one at a time. And like, I think one of the tough things about VGC in general is, people get intimidated about team building because not only do you have the battling component, but you also have team building. But now there's so many great teams that are publicly available online. So I would recommend to anyone that's just trying to get into it, like maybe try out one of these top performing teams to really understand how competitive play works, and then maybe try building your own team. Point is, ton of resources out there, and it's easier than ever to get into it. So I highly encourage anyone that's interested to get into it, because it's honestly a ton of fun, and it's easier than ever now.
Yeah, and I would say also you definitely shouldn't feel intimidated. I know it's a lot of information, but like Aaron just said, plenty of people in TCG as well, but since we're talking about VGC here, plenty of people have come in their first year of playing and had great success. A World's Invite, I would say, is definitely something that's very attainable for someone who's potentially playing their first ever VGC tournament in January. I feel like that's definitely something someone could still achieve if you put in the work and the practice and the time and the research, all that stuff, you can definitely make it happen. So
yeah.
As I close things out, I always like to give people a chance to do any sort of, plugs for social media, plugs for any projects or anything that you are working on right now. So as we close it out, Aaron, feel free to do any of that. The floor is yours, man.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would just say follow me on YouTube. Definitely trying to make a push in the next month to get as many people into VGC as possible. So the YouTube is Cybertron Productions. Wolfie Glick is also, as I've mentioned, another great resource, and he's really killing it and getting people into the scene. And I think his videos actually might be better to start off with because they're a little bit more accessible, and I think it's easier for anyone that might not know anything about Pokemon to just watch it because he's like a really entertaining and obviously an incredible player. And then I would also recommend the websites that I mentioned earlier. I think the Reddit that I mentioned, r/VGC, is going to be huge in the upcoming week. So if you want a hub to really talk to people about competitive play in VGC with, definitely go check that out as well. And tons of other great content creators and sources that I can't just list out all now. But
sure.
If you follow me on YouTube, I'm going to be making a guide or a video on this in the next week or so. So that will take you to all the right places.
Yeah, definitely something to be looking out for. Once that does come out, I'll definitely be sure to link it down below if you are from the future and watching this a little bit in the future. But thank you once again, Aaron, so much for coming on for this video. I really, really appreciate it. I hope it was something that is going to help get people more involved and more interested into the game. I know it was helpful for me as someone who wants to, start exploring VGC a little bit as well. Guys, if you are new to the channel, if you enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like down below and subscribe to see more Pokemon content. I mostly do Pokemon TCG content, but I am going to be looking to do more video game related videos similar to this, and also gameplay and all that stuff in the future. So feel free to subscribe to see more. And I'll be leaving links to everything we talked about today in the description, as well as Aaron's social media. So definitely go drop him, a follow over on YouTube, follow on Twitter as well. I know personally I've, enjoyed watching his Road to Ranked videos in the past. Yeah, it's definitely really cool. I mean, even as someone I've been interested in VGC, but I've never played VGC. I mean, I've just enjoyed watching it. It's kind of like a cool competitive thing to just see. I just enjoy watching people who are really good at what they do, do what they're really good at, right? So and that's definitely the truth with Road Rank. So guys, thank you so much for watching. That is going to do it for us. I'm going to get out of here, and until next time, take care.
Peace.